In today's video, we continue on with our NHL GM Report Card series. We now shift to the Western Conference, and we're going to start with the Pacific Division and the Stanley Cup finalists, the Edmonton Oilers. They are a team that were very busy. Lots of trades, lots of signings, both internally, externally. We saw some offer sheets, a new GM. We have a lot to discuss and grade their work coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have lots to talk about with the Edmonton Oilers today. We're going to kick off the Oilers to start the Western Conference in the GM Report Card series. They've been extremely busy. Of course, they came within one win of winning the 2024 Stanley Cup, but ultimately fell a little bit short to the Florida Panthers. Did not take long for them to get busy. They've had lots of trades, lots of internal signings, a fair bit of external people brought in, including a new general manager that came a little bit later. A lot of the work done this offseason was by Jeff Jackson, who's the CEO of the team, who was filling in after Ken Holland's departure. And, of course, now we have a new GM in place. So let's get started with all the things Edmonton Oilers, all their moves, and we'll grade their work. Ultimately, like I said, Jeff Jackson did the bulk of this. Stan Bowman's only been the GM and officially on the job for a few weeks. But here we go. So we'll get a combined grade. Either way, I'm not going to really give Bowman much credit or much flack for anything I like or don't like, because he hasn't been there that long, and most of this was already set up to be in place for him to kind of take over. So Jeff Jackson is really getting the grade here mostly today. For trades, of course, we started at the draft. They traded their 2025, it was conditional 2025 first, to the Flyers for pick number 32, so they could draft Sam O'Reilly. Now, of course, Sam O'Reilly is a pretty good prospect. I was quite surprised to see them make this move, given the fact that they won't have a 2025 first-round pick now as a asset to use to add to this team going into the playoffs at the trade deadline. That's a pretty big asset to get a prospect that's going to be a couple of years away from having a real legit shot at making the NHL. He seems like a fine player and everything, but they weren't in the first round. Of course, they didn't have this pick. I understand their need to want to add to the prospect pool while they could, but to have to give up a first rounder next year to get this, I'm like, well, you could have just drafted in the first round next year. Even if you do go on to win the Stanley Cup, you're going to be picking in a similar spot in the draft. I just don't know. I like O'Reilly as a player and the prospect. It's fine. If they were picking there anyways, I'd be like, okay, you did a fine job. But to give up next year's first for that, I did not love it. I don't. To me, they take away an important asset for adding to the team later on. But the prospect they took is fine, and this might turn out to be fine. I just thought it was a unnecessary type of reactionary move. Of course, they trade Ryan McLeod to the Buffalo Sabres for Matt Savoy. I like this trade. I know for Buffalo, McLeod's a player that they could use and benefit to strengthen their bottom six. Great skater, great on faceoffs. I think the frustration with the Oilers was that he would go really long stretches without really producing much offensively. Occasionally, due to injuries, whatnot, he could move up in the lineup, and he did produce a little bit better there. But as much as they like his skating and they like his face-off ability and all that, they saw an opportunity here that his price was starting to go up just enough that they thought, okay, can we upgrade the area basically? And keeping Adam Henrique on the team through free agency, which they did, kind of made McLeod expendable. And of course, to get such a great prospect like Matthew Savoy in return, to me, this was a no-brainer. I like the trade for both sides, but I do think long-term I like the upside of Matt Savoy a lot more than Ryan McLeod. So to me, I think the Oilers did fine here. I think the Sabres will do fine in the short term, but long-term, I think they may regret moving Savoy. Of course, that's up to him and what kind of player he becomes. But at this point, I think it's a good move for Edmonton. Of course, they made a prospect swap with the Ottawa Senators, trading Xavier Bourgault and Jake Chason to the Sens for Robbie Herventi and a fourth-round pick. So again, a couple of prospects that's been with them for some time. Of course, Sens GM Steve Staios used to work for the Oilers very recently before going to Ottawa. He knows some of these players as well. So, it kind of gets both of these teams a chance to swap some prospects to get a different look. I have no problem with this deal either. Harventi might turn out to be the best player in the trade. It's hard to say, but it's really difficult at this point to pinpoint and say that any of them will be NHL players. I don't know about Jake Jason. I think maybe it's too early, but it doesn't look promising for him. I think Bourgault definitely has a chance to play some games. Whether or not he turns into a regular, I'm not sure. Same with Harventi. Harventi's a fine player, but it has gone through a lot of injuries in his young career too. Of course, the Edmonton Oilers also traded with division rival Vancouver, getting Vasily Podkolzin for a 4th-round pick. Again, I have no problem. I like that trade as well. They traded Cody Ceci to San Jose along with a 3rd-round pick, and then next year's draft for Ty Emberson. At first, this looked like just strictly a cost-cutting move to deal with the offer sheets that they were had to decide on. And it turned out, I'm not really sure that was the case. Ty Emberson is a pretty solid defensive defenseman. He's younger than Ceci. He's cheaper than Ceci. And he has history with head coach Chris Knobloch for a year in Hartford. So to me, I think this was more of a calculated trade to get a little bit younger, cheaper, but still have a decent defensive defenseman on the team. It also gave them the flexibility that they could kind of threaten to match the offer sheets with St. Louis and try to, maybe get an extra asset out of them or something, which they ended up doing because they then, after the offer sheet scenario unfolded and they decided not to match, they did get prospect Paul Fisher and a 2028 3rd-round pick from the Blues for future considerations. And that's basically a side deal to be like, okay, you don't match and we'll do this for you as a little extra incentive. So in all honesty, they get their picks. So the offer sheets to Philip Broberg and Dylan Holloway, obviously Broberg $4.5 million, Holloway $2.29 million. Big time overpayments for both players, especially on Broberg. With Holloway, it's about double what he should be making. With Broberg, it's probably more like 3 times or whatever the number works out to. Like Broberg and Holloway both should have been, around 1.25 to 1.5, even 1.75 would be a bit of an overpayment. And Broberg's more than double, looking at pushing triple, and Holloway's double. So they get a 2nd and 3rd-round pick back from St. Louis for those offer sheets. Now, in all honesty, I think not matching the offer sheets was the right thing to do. They found ways, like I said, they got Podkolzin to replace Holloway for, he signed for $1 million instead of the 2.29 that Holloway has. And they would, I think it's close enough of a comparable player that they feel like they're not any worse for wear. And they get a player, also similar age, similar profile that, Podkolzin's, can play a 2-way game. He's a good skater. He's got good size. I think they just like, okay, we like this kid enough to pay him less, pay him more like we were hoping Holloway would sign for. Then, of course, Emberson comes in, too. So, and all in all here, I wouldn't have matched the offer sheets either. But the problem is, I guess, and the critique is they were put in a position to face the offer sheets in the first place. I probably would have made a better effort to get Holloway signed because St. Louis knew if you couldn't do the package here, they probably weren't going to be successful. And I guess, Holloway needed a lot more convincing to do this, to do it together. But for Broberg at that price tag, that's just a lot of money. They just couldn't do it. And you know what? You can give the Oilers all the flack you want for not having him signed yet. It sounded like he really wasn't thrilled with staying at Edmonton. There was a bit of a trade request earlier last season, and I don't think he was going to sign with the Edmonton Oilers unless they kind of overpaid him anyway. Maybe not to this degree, but they were offering around $1.8 million, I believe, is what the speculation was, and he didn't take it. So I don't think Broberg was going to sign. He was kind of looking for this anyway. So I think he kind of had to deal with that and be like, okay, he clearly just wants to move on. We need to find a way to do this and get something in return. So at the end of the day, all of their trades, besides the one at the draft, I thought they did a pretty good job with. In the offer sheets, I would have done the same thing. I just think that maybe they should have come to terms earlier in the offseason with Broberg and Holloway. I think they could have offered Holloway a little bit more money and kept him. And as much as Podkolzin might kind of give you similar, replacement value, Holloway, better. You spent time with him, developing him. He's dealt with some injuries, whatnot, but still, he's your player. I think offering him a little bit more to keep him, and maybe just coming to terms with the fact that Broberg didn't want to be there and tried trading him earlier in the offseason before this come to be, you probably would have got a better return than just a second round pick. So to me, I think they do deserve some, critiquing for the offer sheets. Not the outcome, but the fact that they didn't deal with these players earlier enough. That's what I would have done. I would have traded Broberg. It's now that we know enough, I think should have been clear to them that he wasn't really keen on staying, and then I would have made a better effort to sign Holloway, and then you wouldn't have had to do the Podkolzin trade, and you kind of be at square one in a sense, but you might get a better return on Broberg, but that's really difficult to say. Looking at their signings, externally, they bring in 4 players. They signed Victor Arvidsson, who comes over from LA, 2 years at $4 million. Of course, good friends with Matthias Ekholm from their time in Nashville. They bring in Jeff Skinner, who got bought out in Buffalo, 1 year at $3 million. So now your depth on the wings on the top 6, top 9, a lot deeper, especially with the possibility that Evander Kane may miss the number of months with surgery. So, these guys can score. They have good history. I think that should prove to really be a good asset there. They signed Josh Brown, who comes in as a kind of like a Vinny Desharnais replacement. 3 years at $1 million a season. Not keen on 3 years. Not really a big lover of Josh Brown. But if he can give them similar minutes and everything to Desharnais, it might be all right. He's a big guy. He's like 6'5", 6'6", right shot. Not afraid to drop the gloves. He will block you some shots, but I think Desharnais might be the better player, but we'll see. And Colin Delia comes in to add some goaltending depth, 1 year at league minimum on a 2-way contract. So internally, they re-signed Calvin Pickard, which he earned after the way he played in some playoff games. And he was fined during the season after coming up to replace Jack Campbell. So he gets a 2-year extension and $1 million a season. So they've got their goalie tandem. Re-signed James Hamblin, 2 years at league minimum. Bring back Troy Stetcher on a 2-year deal, $787,500, so just above league minimum. Connor Brown, 1 year, $1 million. Corey Perry, 1 year, $1.15 million. Janmark, it's a 3-year deal, 3 years at $1.45 million. Adam Henrique comes back, 2 years at $3 million. And youngster Raphael Lavoie, 1 year at league minimum. So really, they get to keep that all-important third line of Brown, Janmark, Henrique. Perry stays as well. So your bottom 6 is going to be largely intact. You're only really going to see a change of Holloway not being there and Podkolzin coming in. So if you take a look at their lineup, what it's going to look like, you could have a top 6 of McDavid, Hyman, and Jeff Skinner, perhaps. You could play Draisaitl with Nugent Hopkins and Arvidsson. That could be a good line. Your third line likely would be the same, Henrique, Brown, Janmark. Your fourth line would be Ryan and Perry, who are still there. And then you swap in Podkolzin for Holloway. Largely the same team, but you get more depth on the wings, and Podkolzin you hope can play as good or better than Holloway is kind of what you're hoping for, and you have Raphael Lavoie there kind of fighting for a spot, and you have Evander Kane, who's also going to likely miss a decent amount of time, and will start the year on injured reserve by the sounds of things. Where does Kane go in a lineup is the question. Who comes out would be when he comes back. I mean, you could go about it a couple of ways. You could put Kane with Draisaitl and Arvidsson, perhaps. Maybe Ryan Nugent-Hopkins drops down to line 3. Maybe you break up that third line, and either Janmark or Brown goes down to line 4. Podkolzin comes out. It's difficult to say how it could go, but they will have options. They will have depth. On the blue line, you're going to have Ekholm Bouchard. At this point, I would say probably you're either going to put Troy Stetcher or Josh Brown with Darnell Nurse on the second pair, and then you're going to have Kulak maybe with Emberson on the third. I'm not sure between Stetcher, Emberson, and Brown. You get 3 right shot defensemen. I don't know that any of them are top 4 material, though. So somebody's probably going to be having to play a little bit higher and more minutes than what they probably should be. And then you're going to have the other on the third pair, and then one of them will be sitting out. I don't know how the pairs are going to go exactly, but at the same time, that's going to be the hole in their lineup that you need to focus on upgrading. Is that one of these right shot defensemen would be it'd be better if they were a better top 4. I know they're still looking at some depth as well. There's some talk that they may bring in either Justin Schultz, Tyson Barrie, one of these guys on a PTO. And again, I don't know that they're top 4 guys either. So they might be more of a third pair in and out of the lineup. It's hard to say how they fit. But yeah, the defense is not bad, but you can take an argument that it's maybe not quite as good as before. Looking at their in and out, the addition subtraction, just to summarize, coming in, you got Victor Arvidsson and Jeff Skinner and Podkolzin, so you got 3 new wingers. Josh Brown, Ty Emberson on the back end. Colin Delia between the pipes is a depth goaltender, probably number 3, and then Matt Savoy as well. So that's the other question. Does Savoy have a real shot at cracking this lineup in the fall too? I don't know. He may have to start in the American Hockey League. Going out, you've got a number of these guys. Ryan McLeod, of course, was traded out. Philip Broberg and Dylan Holloway, you lose the offer sheets. Jack Campbell's bought out. Sam Carrick is not retained as a UFA. Cody Cece's traded. Vinny Desharnais is not retained. Warren Fogle and Sam Gagne are out as well. So, I mean, looking at, you bring in Arvidsson and Skinner within your top 9 there, but then you've got, obviously Warren Fogle and Dylan Holloway, Ryan McLeod are all out. So, I mean, are the forwards better? I think they are. I think they're going to get more offense and more secondary scoring. So I think that's good. Goaltending is pretty well the same. The back end, like I said, you lose Broberg, you lose Cece, you lose Desharnais, you bring in Stetcher, Emerson, Brown. I think the decor is a little bit weakened, and adding a top 4 guy later on through the year is going to be their main focus. So, yeah, at the end of the day, they left themselves vulnerable to these offer sheets, so I will kind of mark them down for that. I think they should have traded Broberg earlier in the offseason, just giving Holloway a little bit more money to get him signed, and then you wouldn't have had to go after Podkolzin. But all in all, it worked out. Great additions up front. I really like what they've done with the forward group. Great idea and work keeping that third line together. They were so effective in the playoffs. You kind of hope that between Eberson and Brown, that one of them can give you the same value that you got out of Desharnais and Cece on the penalty kill. That's the hope. That's a question mark right now. And you got overall your depth is pretty good and improved, especially when Kane is able to play later on in the year. You got some different prospects in there as well. So for the most part, I like what they did. There's a few things I would have done differently. So I'm going to give Jeff Jackson a grade of a B. I think there's too much good to outweigh the couple of mistakes here that I would have made. Like, besides the offer sheets and then the trade at the draft, but everything else was really good. So I think that's going to offset. So yeah, I'm gonna grade them a B. Stan Bowman didn't really have a lot to do with this. Of course, the Leon Draisaitl contract extension is something that a lot of people would have liked to have seen. I have no doubt it's coming. They will get it done. But of course, because Stan Bowman was hired such late into the offseason, they had the offer sheets to deal with and everything else, that they're not really that far along in the process yet. I would not be surprised if it's done around training camp or before the season starts. I still think they're going to get that done and knocked out of the park as well. I think he'll probably end up coming in, I'm going to say probably 8 years, around 13 or so million. I'm not sure exactly, maybe 13 and a bit, but the rumor is that McDavid, Draisaitl, Bouchard will all take a little bit less than their market value to remain with the Oilers and to make sure they have every opportunity to win as many times as possible while they're all signed there on a long-term basis. So that's my analysis of the Oilers offseason. Let me know how you'd grade everything for the Oilers in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with the latest news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you next time.